I have a dog. I don't have any kids, but I want to make sure my dog's taken care of if I pass away. Under the terms, my dog has to stay with the money.
Anything over that you pass away with, the federal government is going to tax you at 40%. That's the estate tax rate right now.
Can I just go on LegalZoom or Rocket Lawyer and just do it myself?
Of course, anything's possible. Will it be good? Probably not. Will it be cheap? Yeah, sure it will. It probably wouldn't protect you at the end of the day.
What's going on, and welcome to this episode today. We're going to be talking about everything related to trust, probate, and money at the end of the day, because when you own property and you get assets, you got to know how to manage and protect yourself. And today I have a wonderful guest. I have Kathrine. She's from EPGDE law firm. She's one of the best in the industry, and she's going to shed a lot of light on how to protect your assets and at the end of the day, how to save and grow your wealth. So Kathrine, thank you for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Bryan. What an intro.
Oh, well, hey, the pleasure is mine. The pleasure is mine. I want to ask a question because a lot of people that I speak to on a daily basis, especially now with everything going on, I feel that there's a lack of information when it comes to what a trust is. People throw it around frequently. I hear it all the time from different clients that I have. They'll be like, hey, I want to buy this property. I want to put it in the trust. Or, hey, if I were to pass away, I want to put my assets in a trust. What do I do? Can you briefly kind of explain what that is so a fifth grader can understand it?
Yeah, of course. So a trust is a really great tool if it's done correctly and properly. So unlike a will where you just, jot down who you would like to devise your assets upon your passing, it's very simple, straightforward, and it's less costly at the end of the day. A trust requires a lot of maintenance, and it requires everything to be funded properly. So let's say if a client comes to me and they have just bought a property and they want to put it into the name of the trust now, what that usually requires is that, of course, we have to create the trust. The trust is going to exhibit all of the grantor's wishes and everything that they deem fit for during their lifetime and after their passing of what to happen to their assets. Once the property gets funded into the trust by way of a deed, that's the proper way of funding the asset. Now that property is now owned by the trust. So everything is business as usual. Of course, for a revocable trust, it's the same as owning it in your individual capacity in terms of you being able to sell that property at the end of the day. And then, of course, any other assets that you acquire during your lifetime, you can also fund into the trust. A big misconception with a revocable trust and creating it and putting the asset into that trust is that it provides asset protection and it provides protection against creditors. That's a huge misconception. It definitely doesn't, because it's still an asset that you own. You're not gifting it. You're not giving it away. So in terms of something that you would like to provide asset protection for, an irrevocable trust is the way to go. Not so much a revocable trust where you have more flexibility and authority to make decisions and to acquire and sell during your lifetime. An irrevocable trust would be the best form of asset protection as opposed to a revocable trust.
And what you said right now sounds very intricate. It sounds like something that you definitely need to have time to think about. And then there's going to be two questions. How much time with clients do you work with? When does somebody show up to you to actually do a trust and create it? And then my other question is, can I just go on LegalZoom or Rocket Lawyer and just do it myself?
That's probably the number two question. The number one question is how much is it going to cost? But the number two question is, can I just get a template or can I go on LegalZoom? Of course, anything's possible. Will it be good? Probably not. Will it be cheap? Yeah, sure it will. It probably wouldn't protect you at the end of the day. In terms of, I had a client the other day that asked me for a template to provide because he doesn't think legal services are necessary. Well, if you do something wrong, and let's say you have all these wishes and desires to put a bunch of different assets into a trust, and you think that at the end of the day, when you pass away, everything's going to avoid probate, it could very well be not the case. And if it's not done properly, for example, a huge one that we see is that some trusts do not have a two witness lines and the signatory of the grantor, and of course a notary. If any of those are missing, of course, it makes it very, very difficult for a trust to be valid. Funding the trust also is a very, very difficult scenario for someone who is a non-lawyer, because of course it takes, getting a quitclaim deed, right? You either ask a title company or a lawyer can draft a deed for you, or funding it with other bank accounts, just retitling. It takes a lot of guidance from someone who does this for a living. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's foolproof if you do it yourself and you have enough research. It does take a lawyer and expertise to kind of guide you in the right direction in the event you take the wrong turn and now it's too late. So I always advise my clients, if this is something that you're thinking about, invest the time and the money. And even if it's for more research, right? You're not ready to seek counsel right now because it's too much. That's totally okay. But the best course of action is to get some expert advice at the end of the day.
100%. I think when you're dealing with a substantial amount of money, you cannot spend $100-$200 on a little document that hasn't been legally reviewed. You don't know what's going on. You don't even have all your front end and your back end covered, and you think that is going to hold up in court, when we know when there's a lot of money on the line, there's always a loophole and a way to get around it. Which brings me to my next question. So I've seen a lot with people getting married, billionaires, famous athletes, even average people, where they're always talking about trust because it protects them if they go into a divorce with somebody. How valid is that? How does a trust protect you? And I've seen these billionaires, they get married and their wife can't get anything because there's a billion trusts under different names. How does that work?
So in the state of Florida, you cannot disinherit your spouse. At the end of the day, if you do disinherit them, they are entitled to an elective share, which is 30% of your estate. With that being said, you can use things like a prenuptial agreement, maybe a postnup. That's, of course, after you get married when you put these writings in place. A trust can protect you to an extent. Like I said, it does open you up still to creditors, a revocable trust at the end of the day. If you create an irrevocable trust, which is an instrument where it's now a legal entity and you no longer own the assets that you put into it, fine, so be it. But at the end of the day, in terms of if you want to really avoid your future ex-spouse from receiving anything like in your asset, premarital and at the time that you guys have been married, the best instrument and tool to use is a premarital agreement, which is a prenup.
Okay, so a prenup is definitely something you got to have. So it's more of a collaborative approach where you got to have your estate planning done. But if you want to take it to that next degree, what you should do is have a prenup, postnup, have those documents set up in place to make sure that your assets and everything's protected.
Yeah.
My other question is this: where do you see the biggest lapse or errors when creating a trust that most people don't even think about when they're thinking about creating it?
When they're thinking of creating it, usually it's more so for, let's say, your client owns a business and now the business is getting sued and they might go over insurance coverage limits, right? The person that's suing them. So they're going to sue the insurance and now they've maxed out the limits and now they want to come after them personally, right? And then now our client comes to us and says, okay, well, I want to protect my assets. The big misconception is that when the issue has already come about and you have knowledge of it, it's too late to protect your assets. If there's a lawsuit pending in court, if you know of any type of litigation that's going to arise very soon, now that wouldn't be the time to go ahead and start estate planning. There is a look back period. So if someone gets a judgment against you in court, the court is able to look back and unravel any transaction that you did while this transaction or this lawsuit was pending. So the big misconception is to, right when you see trouble and right when you hear about it, to start estate planning. It's really too late at that point. What needs to be done is something that's, when there's no problems occurring and when everything's fine, that's when we should start preparing for the worst in the event it does happen.
So when you're creating the trust, is there any due diligence that needs to be done, or is there any restriction on what can be put in the trust?
Restrictions, I don't believe there's really any. I like to say don't put anything that's a liability into your trust. I don't like to put cars in a trust. At the end of the day, it's not an asset, it's a liability. And if you die, the best course of action is you just go to the DMV and just show the death certificate and they just change title. With that being said, you can realistically put anything into a trust, a revocable trust. I like using revocable trusts because they're so easy and flexible, and really you can do anything with them. In terms of an irrevocable trust, I wouldn't put an asset in there that you intend to sell during your lifetime, or if you're unsure of what you're going to do with it. It needs to be something where, okay, you sit down and you say, this asset or these liquid funds are going to be in my family for a very, very long time. I want to put it in an irrevocable trust, and I don't want anyone to touch it unless I say so. So if you put a house in there and you think about selling the house in the next couple of years, that's not a good instrument to use, not an irrevocable trust. Definitely there's a lot of, it's not impossible, but of course, all parties to the trust need to agree to that transaction. So it just makes it a lot harder for you to, you no longer own that asset, but to kind of navigate what to do with that asset.
And let's say for a trust, and just to be a little silly here, let's say I have a dog, I don't have any kids, but I want to make sure my dog's taken care of, and when I pass away, can I basically transfer all my assets, making sure that under the terms, my dog has to stay with the money, has to live for an X amount of time, and then on his passing, then I can release the funds to whoever?
Yeah, definitely. There's pet trust. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with Karl Lagerfeld. He left all of his fortune to his cat, his cute little cat. And that cat is very wealthy right now because he just left everything. I don't know the gender of it, but boy or girl. So, pets can live on with your legacy, and it's very, very possible. Of course, it usually happens in the event you don't really have anyone else, or if you just have so much love for this pet, you want to just give all of your fortune to it. We've definitely seen that occur. One interesting trust that I did not too long ago was a horse trust. So my client was an equestrian. She had very, very, very expensive horses, upwards of millions and millions of dollars of, I don't like to say merchandise, but they were race horses at the end of the day. So she created a very hefty, beautiful trust for them. So they're going to live very nice lives.
Man, I would love to be that horse.
Yeah.
All right. So pretty much we went over what the trust is, how to establish it, what to create it. What are some crazy stories or anything interesting that you've come across that you like to share with people? Maybe it relates to their personal life, because this is something at the end of the day, I feel we're all going to face it at some point. Loved one passes away, or we might pass away. What's going to happen to our kids? So what's a situation that we can kind of relate with the audience so they can understand, like, hey, I gotta start thinking about this.
Yeah. So a very, very popular story that my boss, Eric, and I always talk about. So we had a client who came in just for a regular consultation. They were, in about their 60s, I would say, healthy for the most part. So they came in for an estate planning consultation. And what happened is that after we finished advising them of what they should do, they had previous documents in place, but they were a little dated from the early 90s. So we said, let's get them all, all revised, and let's create all new documents to make sure they're completely up to date. So they advised that, we're going on vacation and we're going to get all this done when we come back. So of course, lo and behold, they go on vacation, and the gentleman gets very, very ill on vacation, and he actually ended up passing away while they were out of town. So they called us while they were there, and we scourged to try to get new documents put in place to allow him to sign it. For both of them to sign their documents. He actually couldn't pass a capacity test at the time of the signing of the execution. So we were not able to execute his documents. So what is a requirement of any estate planning document is you need to have sound mind to understand the nature of kind of what you're signing and what you're giving away, right? So we had an electronic software that allowed us to ask him some questions, and he needed to be able to answer them. He was not able to answer them, therefore he failed the test. So we couldn't sign his documents that day. This happened in a matter of, I'm going to say, 2 weeks. It happened that fast. And unfortunately, he passed with very dated documents, and it was all because he said, I'm going to push this back. And I'll tell you this, it's never going to be the right time, because there's always going to be something that comes up, and there's always going to be something that's more important, of course. And a lot of times you don't necessarily think now is the time unless some major event occurs, which really makes you switch gears. Unfortunately, that's always going to happen, and we are very aware of it. But if you just pull the trigger and say, now's the day, I'm just going to do whatever I can. I'm going to provide all the information to my attorneys, and we're going to draft it up and we're going to get it executed. Now would be the time. A really big event, God forbid, we always count our blessings, but vacation's a really big one where a lot of people get sick, things happen, tragic events. So we always say before you go on a vacation, it may just be a couple of days. Let's just get your estate planning document signed. Let's just make sure you know where they are, make sure everything's up to date. Things like that really put you at ease. So God forbid if anything happens, we don't go scourging and things go right. They don't go wrong.
And that's why it's important to start making these plans today. And I've realized that when it comes to real estate too, everybody makes a big decision during a life event, death, divorce, something that they have to handle. And it doesn't have to be like that. With proper planning, preparation, you prevent poor performance.
Yeah.
And if you do the right things that you need to do, you can get to a better place and leave your family the legacy that you created, and not leave it to the government or leave it to somebody else that's going to take care of it for you. This is something that I've always been thinking about. All right, let's say I have a bank account. Let's say there's $2 million, $3 million in there, but I have a trust and the account's within the trust, but on the actual bank, I didn't put any beneficiaries in there.
Okay.
What happens if I pass away and then with all that money?
Yeah, really good question. So let's say if it's an IRA, anything like that. I like to use IRAs because that's a huge one and it's very common. If you do not designate a beneficiary designation, that now becomes a probate asset. And it's usually a pay on death account, which means that if you provide a beneficiary to get these proceeds upon your passing, all they need to do is call up the institution and show your death certificate. And if they're the beneficiary, they receive the assets. Now, it's not always the case because the account holder does not designate a beneficiary, and therefore now we have to go through probate. A lot of times what I see is that the beneficiaries don't even know about these accounts and what exists. So we have to throw up a search party and we have to figure out what the decedent owned upon his or her death, which of course costs money for the beneficiaries. And we're trying to track down, with each institution, and there's hundreds and hundreds of them, what this person owned, if anything, and if there was any dollar amount attached to it, things like that. So it's not necessarily, even if there's a beneficiary, the institution reaches out right away. The institution will have a hard time of even knowing if the person has passed. They have to get their insight too. And of course, there's a Social Security Administration, there's a lot of other government agencies, but it doesn't happen overnight. This could take sometimes months and years for a beneficiary of an account to kind of get the proceeds of what they're entitled to, because there's lack of planning. And I always tell my clients, if these accounts exist, give it to your lawyer and give it to your loved ones who are designated here. Just let them know, I use myself as an example. I tell my mom, I have an account here. I have an account here. Here's a list. In case anything happens to me, God forbid, here's what you need to do. No one's going to go and take your accounts and just sabotage you. God willing, if you're paranoid, maybe that could happen. But it's better that you provide some insight and some information than nothing at all. There could be that someone doesn't figure out what, if you have any assets, you have a 401k or an IRA, and it could take years to pay out.
And you brought up a lot of great points. And I feel people are scared to reach out to their loved ones and talk about these things, because anytime you bring up death, automatically, you get the assumption, even you, if you're asking about it, they're like, oh, you're scared that they're going to take it the wrong way, or that, you're, planning their death. And it's not like that, but I can see why a lot of people stray away from that, and why in this industry specifically, people come at life events to resolve it. They're about to die, they're in the process, or something crazy is happening in their life, they need to do the trust. How do you break the ice with a loved one, a family member, to even have and start that dialogue and get them to where, at the end of the day, it's a responsible, right way to handle your estate?
Mm-hmm. Another really good question. It's tough. And I'll be honest, it doesn't get easier to kind of confront people and console them, because we come from a place of, non-emotion. That's our job, right? Because we do this on a daily basis. So we, in an area full of emotions and things like that, we have to come in and we have to be rational, and we have to guide our clients in a very calming but rational way. So, in the event of, these major life decisions, I always tell my clients a story of, what just happened in, someone's personal affairs. A client comes to me and tells me a story. I will relay that story, of course, without breaking confidentiality. I'll say, listen, I just had something like this occur with one of my clients. I don't want it to happen to you. Their circumstances are very similar to yours. We obviously don't plan for things like this, but we need to put proper documents in place. And they really feel some kind of connection when you say things like that, because they know that there's always a possibility, and there's many, many people just like them who could go through the same circumstance. So if someone else possibly went through it, maybe they can go through it. So it's just very, comforting to understand that it's not so much a morbid thing. You're planning for your loved ones. It's, of course, you have all these assets and you want to make sure your loved ones are getting it at the end of the day, because that's really who you're planning for. Your spouse, your children, your grandchildren, and legacies to come. So it's just something to kind of set aside and say, well, I would hate for them to miss out or not receive anything. So I'm going to do this for them. I'm going to step back and I'm going to make sure things are planned for them. And that's usually very comforting. And a lot of people see eye to eye with that.
And it's important. It's very important that they have to start that dialogue immediately. Have you ever seen the show Succession?
No, I started and I didn't finish it.
Okay, it's a crazy show. You need to watch it. It's basically a bunch of billionaire brats and their dad that's a media mogul. It's a great show. But the reason I'm bringing this up is, all right, let's say I'm in the crossroads. I'm on my deathbed. I am thinking about this. I want to make the plan. But then I look over to my other kid. He's a deadbeat. I look at my wife. I think she's going to blow the money. If I pass away, she's going to buy a Lamborghini with it, or maybe get 2 or 3 new boyfriends. And then I go and I look over and I see the other kid, and I'm like, man, I don't trust any of these people to follow my directions on the trust. What do I do in that scenario? Who's going to administer it? What's the process for that? Like, who even handles that whole thing?
That happens a lot. And it's tricky because now we have to bring in third parties. So our firm acts as a corporate trustee, and there's many other institutions and companies that also provide trustee services. So that means that it's a complete, unbiased third party that comes in and just does what the trust tells them to do. So they cannot do anything pursuant to whatever they deem fit. No, it's whatever the language tells them to do. Whenever a client comes to me and says, I have kind of doubts about this child, but I want to protect them, but I have some doubts about their spending habits and some creditors, or maybe like an ex-spouse. What we advise doing is, of course, you provide a plan that's suitable for that child, right? So you can provide any plan you want for as many children as you have. Sally, for example, I'll start naming names. She's a perfect person, and she's going to get, she's the perfect child. She's the eldest, and she can take everything outright upon my passing because I don't have any doubts about her. Susan, for example, she's the youngest, and she has some kind of spending behavior that I'm not quite sure about. I would like for her to have things in trust and have the trustee designate things for her health, maintenance, support, things like that. So the grantor now can designate, okay, well, this person upon my passing is going to get everything outright, and then my child, this other child after my passing, is going to have to ask for distributions, and the trustee has to kind of accept them and acknowledge that they're acceptable. As far as a trustee, when a corporate trustee comes into play, it's very, very important that a third party comes in, because a lot of times they're just reading the lines of the text. So if you put your wishes down in black and white and it's clear as day, the trustee comes in and is just administering your wishes and making sure whatever you put down in writing is being established. Which is very, very important, because a lot of times people fear that, what's going to happen after I die. That's a huge one. They just fear of after their passing what the consequences would be. If you prepare a very good trust with all your directions and wishes in black and white, and it's very thorough, there should be no concerns about what happens after your passing.
So let's say I have my trust and there's $2 million, but as time goes on, I'm taking care of the loved ones. How do I make sure that the trust continues to grow and stay well capitalized within the years to come for my future kids and kids' kids?
So you can, like I said, a trust is so flexible where you can even create a trust in a trust within a trust. And it's a very, 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 very great tool to establish businesses, for example, investments. So if you want to continue a legacy of buying and selling real estate, you can put that in the trust for your children. You can give them a designated, account that says, well, here's money that you are going to get per the business account in the trust. And this is for investing in startups. And I want you to be passionate about something. And I want you to go and say, I'm passionate about this new startup. I think it's going to work. I want to get some of my funds from my trust and I want to invest it here. That's a big way of starting entrepreneurship and not just giving money to somebody and saying, here, just take the money and do whatever you want. Everything is monitored. So there's a trust protector who, of course, looks over the trust and makes sure the trustee is doing everything they're supposed to do. The beneficiaries are doing everything they're supposed to do. There's like law and order. And then they're able to say, I want to make this investment in this real estate because the trust allows me to. They have to make dedicated and good decisions, because if they don't, if one bad thing occurs or something fails, they know that that was the money divided to them and given to them for that purpose. So they don't want to run out of it. So now you're creating a risk for them, and they're going to be less likely to take on anything. They're going to really do their due diligence, and they're going to establish good riddance with whatever they're investing and creating a business in. So they're going to be a lot more diligent when it comes to just throwing away money.
And it's amazing that you can do a trust within a trust within a trust within a trust. And so I want to bring up this story. So I've met a few clients in the past, and they told me as a planning, a wealth planning that they've done, that they'll take insurance policy out on themselves, their kids, their wife, and let's say they'll do it for $1 million. And then one of them passes away. Well, they grab the proceeds from that and they put in the pot of money within the trust. So then it replenishes and takes care of the rest of the people. And then when the father passes away, that $1 million goes back in there. And then at that point, the funds from the trust is paying out the policies for each of these children. And then it creates kind of like a tree of wealth coming down from there. What do you think about that? What's your opinion? Or how's that mechanism even work in the first place?
Yeah, so it's called an irrevocable life insurance trust. And it's a trust drafted and executed for purposes of placing proceeds of a life insurance policy. So like you said perfectly, it's $1 million policy. You put it into the trust. Now, the typical client that asks for this a lot of times is working, they're kind of above the tax exclusion amount, the federal tax exclusion amount of passing away with, let's say right now it's at $12.9 million. Anything over that you pass away with, the federal government is going to tax you at 40%. That's the estate tax rate right now. At around 2026, that's actually going to drop down to about 3.5 to 5 million. We don't know yet, but that's what's expected. So there's a lot of tax planning involved right now, and an irrevocable life insurance trust is a very, very useful tool for eliminating a lot of your estate tax issues upon your passing. So let's say right now, if you're at $13 million and you want to kind of lower your estate exemption amount, you'll put things in irrevocable trust. You just start putting things in irrevocable trust. That means that you no longer own the asset. So when you pass away, it's going to be like you passed away with a lower amount in your estate because you no longer own it. But during your lifetime, you're reaping the benefits as if you did own it. You're the beneficiary. Of course, like you mentioned, after you pass away, you have future beneficiaries that are now reaping the benefits again. So there are so many tools that we can use to lower this exemption amount properly. Of course, it's completely legal. And that just provides a lot of resources and options for people that, don't want to give away 40% of their estate upon their passing, right? So this covers if you're over the exemption amount, that $1 million policy will cover the check that you need to give out to the IRS upon your passing when you're over it.
And anybody can do that. So let's say I want to start out, but I don't have that limit of 10 million or 12 million within the bank, but I want to create something. I do have a substantial amount of money. Let's say I have $1 million or $2 million. Can I start doing this? Or maybe even I have $500,000 in the bank. Can I create or implement that strategy?
Absolutely. So that's something that we say is suitable to start at any time. There's no date of which or anything in the bank in terms of a fixed value of what I need to have in the bank in order to do a structure like this. If you foresee things like this occurring in your life, if you foresee you making a lot of money, you had this huge deal, you're selling this real estate, you're buying this real estate, these are some things that you plan for ahead. You don't plan for when the money's already in your bank account and now you're like, okay, now what? We can do that. That's absolutely fine, but we like to plan before. So when it happens, you're good to go. And you can sleep well at night and you're more at ease with where your funds are going. And God forbid, if anything happens to you, what's going to happen? A lot of times the big concern is that, if it's your property's not in a trust, we have to go to probate. If it's in a trust, you still have to pay taxes to the IRS. So the concern is my beneficiaries have to now pay taxes on the estate. So you want to reserve funds basically so they can have a check ready to pay out and say, here's the funds to the IRS, because they're not going to stop breaking down doors until you pay them. So here's the check, have it, have a great day, let me get my inheritance now. So that's something that we like to plan ahead with anything. I mean, this is estate planning. We like to plan, not do things last minute. I mean, we're busy too. So if you give us something last minute, we can't promise that it'll be completely solid and bulletproof. So planning is very important.
And that's crazy too. It's funny how we went from the first question of creating your own document, working off a template, to how intricate we went through the whole process. We really went full circle on this. And to me, at least financially planning for myself, it opens up a lot of doors within my mind of, hey, I got to start thinking about these things now. I can't be way on the sideline. And at one point, what if something does happen to me and my loved ones are going to be left in the streets? And that's something that you can't even do when you're dead. You can't handle any of that stuff. That has to happen today. And even the bank accounts for the beneficiaries, that's something I'm telling you right now, a lot of people don't even know about that. Where, yeah, you create your trust, you have a will, but when you go to the bank, they're going to look at that and say, okay, but what's on the accounts? And that's the most important thing at the end of the day, what's on the accounts. Even though you had your trust, you did all the proper planning, you got to make sure that you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's at the end of the day. So before we end the pod, I want to ask you a question. Where do you think the future of probate's going to be in the next 5 to 10 years? Where do you see all the transfer of wealth that's happening? Because there's a big shit that's happening. You're seeing the baby boomers are starting to retire. They have all this money that they're sitting on. Where do you think we're going to be in the next couple of years? How big is this industry going to be? And the people who are in the situation where maybe it's just 3 or 4 kids and they have their parents, where do you see all this going?
So it's interesting. A lot of people are acquiring a lot of wealth nowadays at a very young age. It's not like how it was with their parents. You had to work really hard and you have to, build up this empire and then you'll make money. No, kids are making a lot of money and they're coming up with millions and millions of dollars and they're just kids. They don't know what to do with their money. They came with it so fast and it can go so fast. So in terms of planning, I think that it becomes very sophisticated. And a lot of people think, I'm at an age where I'm young, but anything can happen to me. So I don't necessarily think in my eyes, even though I'm a lawyer and I know the importance of it, I don't necessarily think in my eyes it's the right time to start estate planning, because that's for old people. That's what everyone says. It's for old people, right? Estate planning is not for one age and it's not for one particular circumstance. It's for you. An estate plan is just going to be as unique as you. So it's not one cookie cutter size fits all. It's not just, the same for everyone across the board. It's what fits for you. So if you buy a home, your first home, you need an estate plan. If you have a child, you need an estate plan. If you just got married, you need an estate plan. If you care about your loved ones, you need an estate plan, right? Because probate is such a tedious process for everybody. So, of course, the lawyers get involved and we move the probate along, but there's just so many intricacies and so many moving parts that can all be avoided with proper planning. Of course, it costs a little more money, and a lot of times money would be an issue. So we like to do like a cost comparison with our clients. This is what you're looking at if you just create a will, and here's the cost of probate. And this is what you're looking at if you create a trust, maintain your trust. Here's the cost of administration. It's vastly lower. The future is going to be very, very strange in terms of people coming to their senses and realizing, okay, an estate plan isn't just for when I die. It's so much more than that. It's for building wealth. It's for legacies. It's for things that, you aspire to do and aspire to be. So everything is a plan in and of itself. And I just think that, portraying this kind of knowledge and really putting it out there that an estate plan is cool. It's not just for someone when you expect to die. Yeah, it's morbid, but we do plan for that. But it's more so just building your legacy and continuing on.
I appreciate your time for demystifying the whole trust world, probate, and all this good stuff. Just so people who, they align with you, where can they get your information? Put your contact, emails.
Awesome. So my name is Kathrine Karimi. I'm from EPGD Business Law. My contact, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on the EPGD Business Law website. I am also on Avo. We have an EPGD Trust and Estates Instagram account as well. You can find us there. It's EPGD Trust and Estates. Thank you so much for having me, Bryan.
And if it's not there, I'm going to put it all in the description.
Cool.
Thank you for your time. Guys, like, share, subscribe. Let us know what you think in the comments down below, and truly appreciate your time. Have a good one.